Beef is Netflix's most recent show, and it's definitely an interesting one, bordering on the edge of making you question what was within reality right at the end. This 10-episode series followed the unraveling of two main characters' lives following the beef that was formed following a moment of road rage. However, them meeting each other could have been the very thing that needed to happen in their lives at that specific moment. So with that, let's recap, break down, and explain all that there was to take away from this new series. So let's get into it. Here is Beef Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. As we embarked onto the final episode of the season, we saw that after Amy was mourning the fact that George took Junie back home without checking if she was safe and well, cementing the idea in her mind that the divorce was something that he definitely wanted, Danny drove past her, and we saw the events of what occurred in the car chase in the dark. This time it was reversed. Instead of like what we saw in the opening episode where we had Danny chasing Amy, this time we instead had Amy chasing after him. And like we saw in the first episode as well, Danny flipped the bird like she did and they both ended up driving off of an edge, which is where we saw episode 10 begin, with two crows conversing and mentioning how Danny had healed one in the past and how Amy threatened one earlier on in the show. Crows had a main focus in this show, and it was mentioned one of the times that Danny showed a sense of humanity towards one. It was mentioned that when he was younger, he nursed an injured crow back to health. Crows are said to be able to remember human faces, so in the moment where we saw Amy threatening Danny, the crows came to his rescue. Crows are also said to be representative of transformation and change, something which we did see occurring all throughout this final episode, so it could well have been alluding to that too. This is also supported by the fact that the two leaves on the earth are also known to represent growth and rebirth, which was something that kept appearing on screen during different moments throughout the 10 episodes. This was a transformative episode for both of the main characters. We saw the both of them having their lives spiral out of control since the fateful afternoon where they first encountered each other. They'd been on a cycle of revenge against each other from the moment that they first met. And this was a time where we saw that although they were initially trying to harm each other due to the responsibility that they put on one another for their lives changing, as it went on, we saw that they needed to rely on each other and they ultimately faced off in a way that we hadn't seen. After consuming some berries which they thought were edible, it turned out that they were in fact poisonous, and we saw them then start to hallucinate. We saw the pair talk about their upbringing and generation, which to me felt as though it was something that was just waffle that often happens when people are not quite with it. But it was once the score and music kicked in behind the scene in the background where we saw the true meaningful and deep conversation occur which brought their issues to the forefront and showed just how similar they both were, despite the two completely different lives that they were leading, and the rivalry that was present for the most part. They each had their own individual issues that were comparable and were brought up in the emotional conversation. Amy's longing to be complete and to fill the voids in her life that gave her the urge to feel whole, whether that be work, George, or her daughter Junie, something which had been apparent in her life since she was a young girl. She blamed her father for her bad traits and she didn't want to pass them down to Junie. However, she was an individual who even in the present day wasn't able to feel complete, despite having what one would describe as it all. Danny wanted to express the understanding of how all people want is for them to actually be seen in their life, and how Danny wished that he spent more time with Paul and actually spoke some meaningful conversation to him. Danny was chasing to achieve what Amy had, without ever expressing it, but he didn't know if it was even going to be something that would give him the happiness and sense of completion that he wanted, hence why we saw him ask Amy earlier on if he had to get what she had. When they started speaking about Catch-22 and mentioning how life was like a void and how you can't have one without the other, for example light without dark, it showed that their eternal search for happiness was something that may never be complete, because well-rounded happiness is something that may never be achieved, because it comes with its counterpart too, which will always prevent it from being found. They said how they thought that they were dying and that they saw each other's lives in front of them. As they were comforting one another due to believing that they were dying, Amy in the body of Danny said how she saw that all he ever wanted was to not be alone. Hence why we saw Danny trying to get his brother on board in the business, how he got rid of his college applications and spent so much time with him when he was younger, wanting him to work harder so he'd be able to skip grades. Danny had a deep sense of care within him, but he just went about it the wrong way, and it was something that we never saw in the present day, only when he was doing all that he could in order to bring his parents over to the States. Their minds being merged together in a hallucinative state and them also lying parallel to each other, to me, showed that they're both cut from the same cloth, but they've gone in two different directions in life. However, their end goal, drive, determination, passion, and where they were in the present day is the exact same. They were both good people within, however they'd done bad things that meant the people that they cared about got hurt. There were empty voids within their lives that needed filling, and they both acted as the very thing that filled each other's voids in that small brief moment. They were the reality check for each other. With them waking up from the hallucinative state, as they approached an area where they had a cell phone signal, we saw that they received messages, but one particularly poignant moment was the fact that Paul, Danny's brother, was still alive. Danny's relationship was ruined with his brother, but he was just happy that he was still alive. There was also a notification which showed that Find My iPhone was on, which was what tied into the moment when we saw George approaching the alleyway at the end where he fired his weapon at Danny, which did hit him. This is what led us to the final scene in the hospital. As Amy was looking over at Danny, who was lying in the hospital bed in a critical state, there was the sense of feeling sorry for the man that was once her enemy. It looked as if the night that she spent with him was something that stuck with her, and she saw the lonely individual that aspired to be so much lying in front of her. And I got the impression that the loneliness that was present in him was something that she was able to empathize with, being in a life that she was trying her hardest to so desperately escape. As she curled up to him in the hospital bed, we saw them lying there, and with us all wondering if he was going to survive, we saw Danny's arm lift up and go around Amy. Almost like how the two leaves were intertwined throughout the final episode, and the flashes that we had throughout the entirety of the show. It was a very powerful way for it to end, and it was actually quite a moving one. You could argue that there's an alternative theory about the both of them not surviving the car accident or even dying after they spent the night in the wilderness, which could also be supported by them walking into the light at the end of the alleyway when George came to save Amy, but I think it can be disproven by what followed on after it, and the fact that there were reasons as to why George was able to locate her. Overall review. I thought this show was one of the best things that has been put on Netflix this year. It was extremely thought-provoking, had a great sense of symbolism, was nice on the eye when watching, the performances were all outstanding, and it had a compelling story that kept me engaged throughout the entirety of it, even with elements of emotion that were all embedded throughout it, such as when Danny was first moved by religion in the early episodes and also with the final shot in the season. It was so powerful. Ali Wong and Steven Yeun were absolutely phenomenal in their roles, and their similarities, differences, and the fact that they were interconnected in more than one way was extremely impressive to see when watching. The conflict that they had with one another, paired with the sometimes amicable attitude towards each other, was something that I thought was played on well. The 10 episodes being around 30 minutes was the right amount of time to allow for these episodes, because it never felt like it needed any more or any less. The slow and gradual descent into chaos was something that was extremely enjoyable to watch, and you could really feel the tensions getting higher and higher as the episodes went on. In episode 7, it felt like the show was coming to a natural resolution, but the change in pace to accelerate it one final time was a bold move that definitely paid off. You can definitely tell that this was an A24 piece, as there were some real surreal moments that I found myself in awe of when watching, that I feel you only really ever experience when watching a piece produced by A24. I'm a huge fan of this show, and I hope it only stays for one season, because there doesn't need to be any more. It was beautiful in its own right, and it deserves to stay that way. So, there you have it, Beef Ending Explained. If you want to see more videos such as endings explained, theories and predictions, and character breakdowns, then click on the I button, or alternatively you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. If you'd like to give me a show or movie that you'd like me to review, then head over to my Twitter, @brainpilot_, and tweet me what show or movie you'd like me to review next. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. What did you think of this show? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.